All right, the title of today's message is 12 Ordinary Men Who Became Apostles, Matthew chapter 10, verse 1 through 4. Whenever I think about these men, these apostles, and we have such a great respect, and we should, by the way, of these 11 men, actually. So, as you guys are aware, one of the men, Judas Iscariot, didn't make it all the way. And, I was thinking about that. And, like when you've been a Christian for, even a short time, you'll see that there are people that are in your life, and some of them, they were, you know, working right next to you. Some of them were teachers, and some of them, different different things, and some of them even pastors. But then you look now, and they're not doing that anymore. Um, and some of them, not all of them here, but I will say some of them have actually fallen away completely from the faith. And that's what and that's what Judas did. I think it's a reality. Um, we just can't. We don't know exactly the full reason why someone does that, but then it is a reality. Um, for, for Jesus, he knew right away. In fact, when you read the Old Testament, you'll actually see that it was actually part of the prophecy. Now, let's actually go into it here, and let's look at these men, and they're very normal. Just like you and me, we're very normal, right? And in many sense. But you know what? God has called us to be, when we're following Him, uh, we become not normal anymore. We don't become ordinary. In fact, God is calling us to a much higher calling, and hopefully, this message will be very encouraging. So let's go on. Matthew chapter 10, verse 1. I'm reading from the ESV. And he called to him his 12 disciples. Notice right here the word disciples is used, and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. First of all, I want to point out, number one, that disciple. So, what is this? A disciple? A disciple is someone that is following a teacher. So, especially in the time of Jesus, there was a lot of disciples, and a lot of times these individuals, they would be searching out a teacher. You know, it's usually not a teacher going after and looking for a disciple there, but there are times, because there's some exceptional students. If you kind of think about that, so you want to be known as that teacher of that exceptional students there. But really, when you look at all of these individuals, they really weren't anything special. But if you look at the way that Jesus treated these individuals, he actually called them, many of them. That should give you a greater understanding of who these individuals are. Jesus saw the diamond in the rough, in a sense. He was able to see the true potential of these individuals. And many times, I think we look at others, and in fact, we look at ourselves, and we do not look at ourselves in that kind of potential. You know. Now, that being said, I know that some people, they take that to a different extreme, and they say, okay, like, I'm the best, and I could do whatever, and all that kind of stuff. That's not good either. I mean, that's boasting, that's arrogance. You don't want that. So, but the thing is, these disciples, so follower of, and then they're a disciple of Jesus, so they're follower of Jesus, or follower of Christ, and Christ means the Messiah. When you take the word Christian, Christian means, what the Ian, the IAN, means follower of, and then follower of, and then we see the first part, Christ. Once again, the Messiah. So we see right away it has exact same meaning as a disciple. So I mentioned that because so many of us, we actually take our understanding of who we are, and we once we come to be a Christian here, we identify ourselves as a Christian. But I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge you to take that a step further and and be a disciple, because that's who you really are. You're a disciple of Jesus. And isn't it interesting that suddenly now your commitment was commitment level has increased? Because I don't know why, and it should have never been done this kind of way here, but the terminology of Christian has been watered down so much. So I want to challenge you and actually, like, let's begin to call ourselves disciple of Jesus, and see the commitment level rise. And as a disciple, we need to be walking like Jesus and talking like, we need to be more like Christ. And let's begin to do that. So the next thing over here is that Jesus, he before he actually calls these individuals here, in many of the other gospels, um, Mark and Luke especially, it talks about how Jesus, he went into the mountain and he prayed, and most likely he probably didn't even sleep, because this was a very important thing. Now, I do want to say that he had many, many disciples. There was many people that followed him, and they identified themselves as a disciple. They themselves gave them their own title as a disciple of Jesus, because they said, "I'm going to follow him," even though they may not have called. Even though Jesus did not call them as a disciple, and that's actually perfectly fine here. But these people, Jesus actually called them. And over here, you can see it even more evident that he is now calling these individuals to him by name. And you'll see it, and these are the 12 disciples by name. This is important. Okay, so let's actually do that. And the next part here is that, Jesus obviously knows what's going to happen to these disciples, and what's going to happen to them during his ministry, what's going to happen to them like after he is, after he resurrects, after he is taken up into heaven. He understands what's going to happen afterwards. Great success, but also there's going to be great persecution. Unfortunately, we're going to see some major consequences to that there, but Jesus already saw that. So I believe one of the major reasons why Jesus prayed for these individuals is because of for them, so they will remain strong, that they will remain faithful. And guys, I got to tell you, these men were amazing, phenomenal, and they remained to the end. One of the things I wanted to kind of mention here is that, think about this. If you had a business or you had an organization, you would want these kind of people. These people are willing to live, the vision of the company, the goal of the company. They're not going to deviate. They know the company very. They live and breathe the company's motto and the vision. I mean, they love it, right? So these individuals, they're willing to die for the company in a sense, right? Any company having even one of these individuals is a great blessing. Any church having just one of these individuals, it would change the church in a sense. But they had Jesus choose 12. Obviously, we're going to say 11 because one fell away. So these 11 are world changers. And I want to just challenge you here, because maybe God is calling you. God's calling somebody like you to maybe be a world changer, like these individuals. But how do you become like that? Well, let's actually talk about that. First of all, Jesus actually gives power and equips those that are called. So notice he gives them the authority. Whose authority? That's Jesus' authority here, because the unclean spirit, these are demons. They know who Jesus is. But when we're called and given authority by Jesus, these demons understand that right away. When you do that, Jesus is going to also give the power to cast out these demons, to give the power to heal, all the kind of stuff there. But it's not for the sake of doing that. It's for the sake of the gospel. It's for the sake of Jesus being glorified there. This is how we need to understand that. It's not just for the sake of the miracles right here. So let's understand how powerful that is. And these disciples, they were sold out. They were 100% sold out for Jesus there. So let's begin to understand that. Notice in verse 2, their title has been changed. It says the names of the 12, and what's it say? Apostles. And then here are the names. Are these first Simon, who was called Peter. Peter in Greek is Petros, and Petros in Greek means rock, but it's not just any kind of, it's not a small rock in a sense. We have to look at this as a bedrock, which is very, it's a foundational stone in a sense where you could build on that. Very hard to build on, but still when you build on it, it's going to be immovable. Remember when Jesus said is that the church is going to be built on the bedrock foundation. It's built on him. It's immovable here, So Andrew, his brother. So Peter had an Andrew, his brother there. It's interesting. Andrew, when you look at the accounts here, and ask the question, who was the first disciple? And it is reported that it's most likely Andrew. And then from Andrew, he got his brother Peter, and then his they're very close friends, James and John and whatnot there, because they're all fishermen, right? So they were able to do that anyway. And then James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. So notice there's those two. So it's interesting that there's the four, right? Now, Jesus always had a three. So it was Peter, James, and John. And I think that's very interesting here. So my theory of why he chose a three, number one, I believe that Peter, he was going to be the head of the church there. So that it makes sense that he was one of the three. He needed to be there as an eyewitness to make sure that he was there. When you look at the last sermon that I gave, I think a couple weeks ago there, it was talking about the Jairus, where he and his wife, they're taking Jesus and his disciples to their daughter that passed away, but then Jesus takes the three, Peter, James, and John, so they're eyewitnessing all these things here. James is probably an interesting one here, but James is known as the first apostle that died. And after that they actually captured Peter there, but then Peter did not die right away. And then so James was the first martyr. John, he actually was the last one to die out of all the apostles, and he actually died out of old age. So it's very, very interesting. So maybe that was the reason why Jesus actually picked these three, more of an eyewitness and their testimony there. Interesting enough, when you start to read about the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, most scholars believe that the Gospel of Mark actually was the very first one to be written. And it's interesting, Mark is, his full name is actually, well, his first full name is John Mark. And then John Mark he's actually known as the disciple of Peter. So basically, bottom line, what I'm saying here is that Mark is more of a verbal account here that he's writing down directly from Peter, and of course, obviously, this is all an inspiration from God there that he's able to remember all that, and and you'll see that all of the other gospels, Matthew is borrowing from Mark, and Luke is borrowing from Mark, and John is also doing that as well. Okay, so let's go on. And then Philip and Bartholomew. Bartholomew's other name is Nathaniel. And Thomas, he is known as Doubting Thomas. And Matthew, the tax collector. And look at this right here, James, the son of Alphaeus. So we do see another James here. So there's two James. So let's not be confused about that. And we're going to find there's actually a third James. so I'll get there. And then Thaddeus, his other name is Judas. But his other name that's in the Bible is Jude. And when you think about the book of Jude, you'll see Thaddeus there. Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot. Obviously, he's famous for the one that betrayed betrayed Jesus. So you'll count all 12 names. So let's go talk about how these individuals were before they met Christ. And hopefully you'll see, I don't know if I did a poor job on this here, but I was trying to show that the disciples sad and angry, not content with their life, and then the background should be the Sea of Galilee. So they were ordinary men, guys, just like you and I. You know, it doesn't mean that they don't have they're not living a great life. Many of them were probably living a okay life or a great life in a sense of monetary wise and whatnot there. But were they really living? I could tell you my own life here. The greatest thing that ever happened in my life was when I met Jesus, when I became saved at the age of 16. And there's definitely a different story of before Christ and after Christ. This right here is a testimony. So this is what happened before Christ. So Peter knows that Jesus is much more than a man. So remember when Peter saw that Jesus commands them, actually suggests to them here, these fishermen, to cast the net on the other side. And then Peter and Andrew and these people, they're like, we've been fishing all night long. We didn't catch anything like that here, but they actually followed through. They caught the most amount of fish, and they're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is when Peter realized that Jesus is actually more than a man, that he is actually the Son of God. So he once that realization happens, this is what he says in Luke chapter 5, verse 8. Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord. He recognizes sin because he's in the presence of the Messiah. He's in the presence of God where he is righteous and holy. And isn't it interesting that when you meet Christ, one of the first things that you realize is you're a sinner? I realize that. And I think many of us, we are probably in this state where when we saw that, we're like, you know what, God, you don't want any part of me. I'm a wicked sinner. There's other people a lot better than me here, so please, I'm okay if you pass me by. And this is where Peter is, saying like, I am. You don't want any part of me. And then James and John, they were in their boat mending the nets. James and John, Mark chapter 1, verse 19. And mending the net is an interesting terminology here because they're fixing the nets. And then they're tying the strings between the nets there because they're, it's gonna cause a hole and fishes are gonna be, are going through it there. So they have to keep on fixing the net. When you think about our Christian life, we are constantly mending the net of the gospel in a sense. And it is important that we constantly be mending the nets of making sure that that the people, that when we're sharing the gospel, that it's not going through so many holes. In a sense, we got to keep on doing that. And when you think about that very carefully, it is about understanding more of the Bible. It's reading the Bible over and over again, understanding. It may mean for you to go to Bible college. It may mean for you to go to seminary school, because it's going to start building on that. Now, that being said, here you want to make sure that you're in the Word of God, and you don't want to just keep on studying, theology in a sense of you want to study the Bible, and you want to make sure that the Bible and God's Word is the final authority, the highest authority there. But when you start doing that, what happens is that you're able to like start to not only defend the gospel here, but then be able to be on the offense. And when you're talking with somebody here, you're able to bring up different things that these individuals are already thinking about, like you're putting yourself in their shoes and asking yourself, okay, if I was in their shoes, what kind of questions would I be asking? And then you're able to study that and you're able to do that. And I challenge you guys, because some of you guys are called to be leaders. Some of you guys are called to be teachers. Some of you are called to be pastors. Some of you are called to be missionaries and evangelists, whatever it is, right? But we're all called to go out and to share the gospel. What's it saying in Matthew chapter 28? It's talking about the Great Commission. It's not just talking about certain people. It's talking about all people. I mean, all believers, right? All Christians, meaning all disciples. And it says, go and make disciples of all nations. And it says baptizing them here. And it says also teaching them about them. So this is what we need to do. This is an important thing. So let's go over here. John. So John's Baptist was standing with two of his disciples. So he did have disciples. But look at this. One of his disciples was Andrew. Once again, Andrew was probably the first one to become a disciple of Jesus. He found Philip from Bethsaida, the city where, look at this, Andrew and Peter were. So now we see an affiliation with Philip. So we got Peter and Andrew, we got James and John. We see another individual, Philip, and Philip found Nathaniel. Nathaniel's other name is Bartholomew. So now we see a correlation here. And Jesus saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax booth. I don't think Matthew was one of their friends here. So I think he was included there, but it's interesting. And the Jesus calls him directly. Once again, if you, I recommend you to go back to the message talking about Matthew, and his calling is amazing there. When they met Christ. And I do want to apologize. I'm not putting all the disciples' information here, but in the end, we will cover exactly what happened to the disciples, okay, the apostles. So when they met Christ. And notice here, this is a great way of sharing your own testimony. One of the greatest things that you can probably do for when you're sharing about God to somebody is share your testimony. Like, how were you before Christ? What happened when you met Christ? And how are you after Christ here? So we have Jesus, and he is ministering, and people are realizing, and these individuals, the big thing is they realize their mind is open, their heart is open, and they have an understanding, and then they're like, oh, this is the Messiah. This is the Messiah. All right. So here's Jesus. He says this to Peter right after he says, I'm a wicked man. I'm a sinner. He goes, do not be afraid. From now on, you'll be catching men. So what does that mean here? Is that, like Peter, you're no longer going to be living this lifestyle of a fisherman. Your life is changing. Right now, you're going to be one of my disciples. You're going to be learning to be following. Your identity is changing, or has changed, So Peter is saying, yes, I will follow you. And now Peter's identity is now a disciple. And obviously he becomes an apostle, and he becomes one of the greatest leaders really that the church has ever had. And it's not just Peter here, but these apostles, these 11 apostles were phenomenal. Once again, if we only had one of these individuals at our church, it would radically, in my opinion, change our church. If we had these 11 even now, it would radically change the world. So pray, pray to God that God will move your heart and move you to become very similar to one of these apostles who were so committed to God, so committed to Jesus, to follow him to the end. James and John. So immediately he called them, and look at this, and followed him. So they immediately, so notice this right here. This is the element, when they did that, they did the extraordinary thing. They're not normal anymore. They did the extraordinary by just simply following. One of the two who heard John, so John the Baptist, speak and followed Jesus. He followed Jesus, and then that was Andrew. Follow me. So Philip just, he heard that and he followed him. So notice that there was an action involved in it, and Jesus already knew. So he followed him. Nathanael answered, and look at what he said here. And this is Bartholomew. You are the Son of God. You are the Messiah. You are the one that we've been waiting for. You are the one that I've been waiting for. I will follow you till the end. Follow me. And look at this. Jesus simply does that. In Matthew, he rose up and he followed him. Now, a question should be like, when did these individuals become saved? When did they become a Christian? I believe that everything happened so instantly here. When they realized here, when they stood up and when they took the step to follow him. And there's a song, I will follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back. That's what these individuals did. When they rose up and they took the step to follow him, I believe that they not only were saved, I believe that they also became a Christian. But once again, I believe that they became a disciple all at once. All at once there. So if you're, if you're asking, am I a Christian and not a disciple? No. My answer to you is no, you are a Christian and a disciple. You are not only saved, so it's all three. It's a trifecta. You're saved, you're a Christian, and you're a disciple there. So understand that, understand your position with God here, and be privileged to be called one of his disciples. After they met Christ. So look at these apostles. They have radically been changed. Now, let me kind of stop here and just talk about these apostles. Why are these apostles so special? Well, first of all, we have to understand what an apostle is, and I think there's confusion about this here. But what is an apostle? Apostle is someone that has been with Jesus, someone that has identified themselves as a disciple, and someone that's been called by Jesus there. So to notice here that the only people that are really called, so disciples can be, there was thousands, in fact, right? We know that there was 72 that was sent out here, but really we can say that the only ones that were truly called by Jesus was the scripture that we just read, where Jesus called these individuals and he named them by, he named them, right? So there was a 12 disciples that are called apostles. Their name and identity was changed when it says that Jesus called them. That's an important thing. And then they were sent out. So right after this right here, in this chapter 10, Jesus sends them out. So this is the meaning of an apostle there. Now, you might be asking, but how about the Apostle Paul? The Apostle Paul had the exact same thing, because when he was in the road to Damascus there, and he was there, Jesus was in a light, and he was around him, and that he called Paul by name, and then he called him and he blinded him, and then he actually gave him a mission for him to do. So all at once, he became a um, a disciple, and he became an apostle when Jesus called him to go out and do a mission there. So he is also qualified as a as an apostle there, but no one else. So you could really say that is these 12. But how about Judas? Well, Judas, I mean, if he would have stayed, then very possible he could have been here, but he didn't. He actually did not make it there. He became, he actually fell away and betrayed Jesus there. So they traded, they actually, what's the word? They actually had someone else that took his place, and his name was Matthias. Now, let me give you the wonderful story of Matthias there. Matthias, once again, he identified he was also like he was also a disciple. He was also not directly called by Jesus in that situation there. But remember, there was one time where he called the 72, and Matthias was probably one of the 72 that was there. So that's the reason why our church, the early church, would actually consider Matthias as as one of the apostles, and also how they went about choosing this individual is because they actually cast lots, meaning that they were relying on God. So God chose him, and God also called him. Sends him out here. So therefore, we have the 12 apostles plus Paul. But let me give you another insight here of why this is also very important. We're going to cover more about this here, but let me give you a quick little snapshot of this here. When you begin to study about the Bible here, the New Testament is written by either an apostle or someone that's associated with the apostles there. So we got Matthew, he's an apostle. We have Mark. Mark is associated with Peter. He was a disciple of Peter. His name is John Mark, and he was able to write those things down. He was like more like a secretary there. And then we have Luke, and Luke is associated with Paul. Once again, an apostle there. So Luke was a physician, but he was definitely like an historian there. And then we have John, the apostle John, and then we have once again the book of Acts that's written by Luke. So everything checks out, and then we have a bunch of books by Paul. So it's all correct. And then we have the book of Jude. So we already talked about that. Thaddeus, he's one of the apostles there. And then we go back again now to Peter. He's one of the apostles there. And we go back to John, who writes 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and also Revelation. So the entire New Testament is written by one of the apostles there. So we have a lot to thank for these individuals. And these apostles were not just anybody anymore. They were people that were highly regarded, highly respected. Now let me kind of stop here and kind of go back a little bit. Who were these guys? Fishermen were not really looked high upon. I mean, I'm thinking about like a shepherd. They're not really looked high upon here. So in terms of the worldly view of these individuals, they were looked down on. They were not your typical high priests and Pharisees and whatnot there. They did not match up. How about Matthew? He was a tax collector. His status was as low as someone that was like a prostitute, maybe even lower, because he was considered a traitor. So you can see that. But then once they were identified as the faithful apostles, they were completely changed. They were welcome into the community. Really, the one that was the most, the one that had the most hardest time of being admitted and being accepted to the church by the church was actually the Apostle Paul. But later on, they realized the Apostle Paul was truly a Christian, and they also realized how important he was because of his extensive knowledge of the new of the Old Testament, and he was able to and a brilliant man, by the way, and he was able to connect the New Testament with the Old Testament, and it made a lot more sense to him because now he was able to have the full gospel, not just the Old Testament, not just a New Testament, but he was able to do that. So he became a phenomenal teacher for the church. So this is after they met Christ. So Jesus says to Peter, "Feed my lambs, feed the church." And then Peter finally accepts that. And remember, he was very defeated because remember he actually denied Christ, and he did not think that he was qualified at all. Jesus said otherwise. He said, "No, this is when I need you the most." And this is when Peter said, I think Peter realizes that his strength is no longer himself. He had to completely rely on Jesus. How wonderful it is when a leader does that, when a leader realizes that, you know what, they can fail. Peter realized he can fail at any time. He's already denied Jesus. He's realizing, Jesus, I need you. I am so imperfect. I am not qualified to be the head pastor or the head leader of your church. There's no way. And of course, Peter is, a very humble leader. Don't we need more of that? We do. We need more humble leaders. And I pray that I will become a humble leader. I pray that our church will become a humble church with humble leaders there. So anyway, and Peter does. Peter becomes a wonderful leader that becomes very, very much like Jesus. Acts chapter 1, verse 15. In those days, Peter stood up among the brothers, and how wonderful it was that Peter did that. You know, they went up to the upper room where they were staying, and notice this 11 names. Look at this right here: Peter and John and James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus. So remember, we have two James, and Simon the Zealot and Judas the son of James. Remember, Judas, Thaddeus, his other name is Judas here. So we have all of the 11 names there. And the other one that replaced Judas was Matthias. Matthew, Matthias, it means their names actually are the same, and it means gift of God. How wonderful they were. And these men were all gifts of God. When you start to really study about the apostles, I am so thankful for them. They are great role models of what they've done. And if we can be half of them, I mean, how wonderful the world would change, in fact. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Now, whoa, wait a minute. We got to stop here. Apostles' teaching, not Jesus' teaching. Here's the reason why that matters. The church recognized the importance of the apostles, and also the church recognized the apostles' teaching is not. What is the apostles' teaching? It means the teaching of Jesus. They put Jesus's words and his teaching high above everything else here. So when you read about the apostles' teaching, it really means the teaching of Jesus there. But I think it's here on purpose to show how important the apostles were. Remember, this was written by the physician Luke, the historian Luke, and he also at this time recognized how important these apostles were for the church and going forward. And the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayers. This is what's very needed. Spend some time looking at this map. I want you to like maybe even stop it here and just kind of view this very carefully. But look at the impact of these disciples, and it's not just the disciple, it's not just the apostles here, but the church. They expanded. They went everywhere in the entire world here, but especially here in Europe and Africa and whatnot there. Now, and once again, I want you to stop it here and like really review this. I'm getting this information from the Fox's Book of Martyrs. It's an old book over here, but I think it's by John Fox. And let's go look at how these apostles and the early church leaders paid the ultimate cost. You know, they all paid the ultimate cost. And look how many people were crucified. We got one, two, three, four, five, six, seven out of the 12 apostles were crucified. And so remember, Jesus was crucified. So, and isn't it interesting that, they saw, even though they were all scattered, but when Jesus, was going to the cross, they saw how badly beaten he was. He was so disfigured. They cannot even recognize him anymore. I mean, the enemy, they beat him so badly, and then and one of the things I want you to also understand is that, like for pictures and movies, they have to cover him, but he was fully naked. This entire thing was done to shame people here. Many people realize, including the thief on the cross, that Jesus had nothing. He did nothing wrong. And remember what he said. He he rebuked the other person that was on the other cross, that was cursing in a sense and mocking Jesus. He said, "No, you have no idea that Jesus did nothing wrong. He doesn't deserve this." And then he looks at Jesus and says, um, "Will you please remember me today here?" And Jesus says, "You will be with me today in paradise." So he went to heaven with him. How wonderful! What a wonderful story that is here. So anyway, let's go look at this. Peter was crucified in Rome, and Andrew was crucified in Greece. James was beheaded in Judea, and James over here, I believe that this James beheaded is probably I believe this is the brother of James. I mean John. John died of old age in Greece, and Philip was crucified in Turkey. Bartholomew or Nathaniel was crucified in Armenia. So, I mean, all of these guys, notice that they held strong all the way to the end here. Thomas was speared in India. Matthew was speared in Ethiopia. James, the other James, which is from Ephesus, he was clubbed to death in Judea. Judas, remember, this is Thaddeus, was crucified in Greece. Simon the Zealot was crucified in Britain. Matthias, the one that um, um, was a took over for Judas, was beheaded in Judea. I got a question for you though. Like, why did these men, including Paul and Mark, James and Luke, why were they so passionate? Why were they willing to die for Jesus? And that's a very good question, and I believe that answer falls in line with how. Um, See over here in the middle of the page, we see a name James. I told you about this other man named James. Who was this guy? This is actually the brother of Jesus. When Jesus was alive, before his resurrection, um, he did not believe. In fact, many of Jesus' family did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They did not believe that. But then what happened to James? Well, he and all of these individuals saw Jesus resurrected. Remember, he says in the book of Acts that he resurrected and he showed himself to all of these people, right? It's interesting. Paul later on realized all this as well. So he must have been struggling with this, but at the same time, it wasn't until Jesus directly, confronted him and actually spoke with him, and also sent them out here. So, but then all of these men were profoundly impacted. I believe the one of the greatest impact was because Jesus came back from the dead. He was resurrected. Very different. And the resurrection is different than the example of like Jesus raising up Lazarus. Lazarus, he was resurrected. I mean, he was he was rose, like rose from the dead, right? But he died again. Not Jesus. When he resurrected in his resurrected body, like the Bible says that he is the first fruit in a sense. He's the first one that will be resurrected. Every one of us will have eventually a resurrected body. The Bible talks about that, but in the end, so it'll be a body that is not perishable. It will not die there. Every one of us. Now, you might say, wait a minute, every one of us? Yes, every one of us. But then what's going to happen here is that those that are those that are believers, those that are truly saved, are going to be resurrected, and we're going to be we're going to have a body that will live forever, and we're going to be in heaven, right? In the end, it's going to be new heaven and new earth, and we're going to be there. But then for the other ones, they're going to be resurrected, and they're going to actually be in torment. So anyway, make sure that when you're seeing all this, when you're hearing this, I hope that it should be changing you. And please, some of you guys are probably saying, "Well, I have more time. I'm so young." No, do not buy that. Make sure that you are moving beyond that here and make the decision to follow Christ now. So others transformed by Christ, and there's so many. There's so many. And once again, it might be you here, but I want to just show you some maps. This map is taken from La Statista, and then it's talking about the Christians around the world here. But one of the things that I want to show you here is that let me show you a couple things. One is Korea. Korea before was very strongly in the Word of God. They were very passionate, but look how they've fallen. They're probably more in the 10 to 29% range, and they're going down further there. The places that are really thriving now is places like Brazil, by the way, and number one mission sending country is still the U.S., but the number two is actually Brazil. Before it was Korea. So Korea is still the number three sending country for missionaries in the world, but still they are declining very, very fast. Let me end with this last slide. Where do Christians face the most persecution? I'm getting this here from cardomissions.com, and I think they're getting this information here from yes, over here, the World Watch List 2015 here from Open Doors. Anyway, it's very obvious if you were to ask the question here, what country does the most persecution for Christians? And unfortunately, is North Korea. And look at all these kind of places here. What struck me about this map was Mexico. Mexico is right next to us, our neighbor, and they are a country that is persecuting a lot of the Christians there. So this is actually not a good thing. But it's this is a map that I believe that is important for us to see. You know, and we got to pray for the entire world. We got to pray for people in Mexico. We got to pray for the Christians there in Mexico. There, we do send a lot of missionaries here in Mexico, by the way. Um, and you probably went to a Mexico mission trip as well, but we got to really pray for them, guys. We got to pray for all these people here. We got to pray for people here in this top 10 list here. Now, let me give you one ray of hope. Did you know that when it comes to revivals, many of the places where it's in the top 10 are are actually the places where the greatest revival is happening in these places. Where God, where the darkest places in the gospel has the greatest, brightest light of the gospel. That's amazing, isn't it? I hope that this message really challenged you. I know that this message it was interesting. I did not think that this message was going to turn out to be more of a mission message, but it actually ended up being more of a mission message. And I do want to remember. I want you to pray for all the missionaries throughout the entire world, but especially here in Tucson, Tucson July Church, we have several missionaries that we're actually supporting. Please pray for them. I believe that we're going to be doing something here for the Spain missionary where I believe that they're looking for a car. They're in need of a car. So either this week, this coming Sunday, or the next coming Sunday, we're gonna have a fundraiser. So please support us in that, so they can get a car. All right, you guys have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.